Next tonight, the continuing fallout from the Los Angeles police beating. Daryl Gates, the police chief who was ordered by the Los Angeles Police Commission to take a paid leave, filed suit today to get his job back. Civil rights groups filed a countersuit to keep him suspended without pay for 60 days. Is the highly publicized case in Los Angeles an aberration or part of a disturbing trend? And what role does a chief of police play in creating the standards and ethics of a department? We will hear from 4 chiefs of police. But first, this update from correspondent Jeffrey Kay of public station KCET.
Today, the battle over the future of Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates shifted from the political to the legal arena as lawyers for both sides filed their court documents. The stage was set last week when LA Mayor Tom Bradley for the first time asked the chief to step down.
Today, I met with Police Chief Daryl Gates. At that meeting, I called upon Chief Gates to resign as Chief of Police.
Following the mayor's request, the civilian commission that oversees the police department voted to suspend the police chief for 60 days. But an angry city council quickly thwarted the commission's action. It voted 10-3 to reinstate Gates if the chief promised not to sue the city for damages.
The police commission's action, putting him on leave, assigning him to his home in the cursory manner that it did, in my opinion, was a flagrant disregard for due process.
Justice has been done and something that was wrong has been corrected.
We are the people who are elected to represent you, and we are the ones who determine what's going to happen in this city.
The question of just who does control the police department has become a deeply divisive issue in the city of Los Angeles. Over the weekend, local civil rights activists, joined by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, renewed their call for the chief's resignation.
Why is the whole world looking at Los Angeles? Because what they saw on March 3rd was the Oscars of police brutality.
The reaction to the March 3rd beating of Rodney King, a black motorist who was beaten up by white officers, has polarized the city along racial lines. Police critics argue that past remarks by Gates disparaging minorities have set a tone of racism. They contend that all too often blacks and Hispanics are victimized by police.
We must remain resolved to support the police chief and the men and women of the LAPD who risk their lives daily for our public safety.
By contrast, the ranks of Gates supporters have been drawn largely from business groups and white communities, which, like the city council, has been grateful for the police war on crime. In past years, gang crackdowns by the police have drawn praise from many citizens. While some groups complained that civil rights had been violated in the sweeps, night after night, generally favorable publicity boosted the political standing of the police department. The city council, whose members received generous donations from the police union, became allies in the fight against crime.
Please, my friend, please, let me explain.
Over the weekend, one black city council member tried to explain the council's support for the chief.
Go back to Beverly Hills. Go back to Beverly Hills.
The audience was outraged over the councilman's refusal to take a position on whether Gates should be fired.
I am not going to come out for or against until the investigation is completed.
Although pending investigations will examine police training and performance, the larger issues of police community relations are now being addressed in a highly politicized environment.
We're joined now by 4 police chiefs from across the country. Reuben Greenberg of Charleston, South Carolina. Stephen Bishop of Kansas City, Missouri, who joins us tonight from San Antonio, Texas. Larry Binkley of Long Beach, California, who's in Los Angeles tonight. And also from California, Joseph McNamara of San Jose. Chief McNamara, you wrote an opinion piece for the Wall Street Journal on Friday in which you argued in so many words that Chief Gates bears responsibility for what happened. Why do you say that?
Well, the chief sets the culture of a department, and we can't really believe that the Rodney King issue was an aberration. The evidence is too strong with racist jokes and joking about the beating on the communications network, the past practices there, past statements by Chief Gates. Now, chiefs throughout the country have for a long time very properly said that personnel must be held accountable. And the chief also must be held accountable. And I think the leadership of that department indicates that the public is losing confidence. The chief himself has been a source of conflict now, and the chief's job is to lower conflict in the community. So Daryl Gates has had a long and honorable career. I think it's simply time for him to retire. I don't see how the department can regain credibility with him at its head. And the civilian political apparatus must be in control of the police in a democracy, just as it must control the army. So it seems to me that despite the legal structure of Los Angeles, which is just about unique, where a chief is given civil service tenure as if he's a patrolman or a detective, despite that artificial issue, that the chief could do a lot for his own officers and for his own city and for himself by taking the retirement that he deserves.
All right. Chief Binkley, you worked, as I understand it, for Chief Gates for a number of years. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, Judy, as you know, I really came here to talk about community relations, and it wasn't my purpose to defend Daryl Gates, but I certainly will. I'm a little disappointed in Chief McNamara for his intentions to manage a law enforcement agency that's several hundred miles away from him and to make those comments about accountability.
I'm not trying to manage anything.
I understand that, but your assessment, I think, is a little premature, and I really didn't know you knew that much about the Los Angeles Police Department.
But this is a national issue. This affects every police department, not just Los Angeles.
I know, and I didn't interrupt you, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't me. What I'm saying is there's three things that are really important. One is the misconduct that was observed on the television was the most blatant misconduct any of us have seen in 30 years. But everybody I've talked to in Los Angeles County or in the nation has acknowledged that, including Daryl Gates. He's asked for the district attorney's investigation. He's asked for a grand jury investigation. He's cooperating with the FBI. You're making an assumption about a culture in the Los Angeles Police Department that's a very invalid assumption. When you're saying you should hold him accountable for the culture, you're broad brushing a bunch of Los Angeles officers, about 10,000 in force, as having a bad culture. And they're some of the finest law enforcement officers anywhere in the world. And to make that assumption without any evidence is an error, I think, to say the least. I think what you're going to have to do is, what the mayor and the council are doing, is a fair and objective assessment. And what they'll look at is such things as training. They'll look at discipline, community relations programs, controls and audits, management accountability, and affirmative action in the hiring, placement, and promotions. And I suspect what you'll find is Daryl Gates did a fine job in the last 10 years.
Chief Bishop, let's turn to you now.
I'm sorry,
Chief
Shannon,
of the Kansas
I can't hear
City. I'm sorry, Chief Bishop from Kansas City Police. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I wanted to ask you where you come down in all this. Do you think that Daryl Gates should be held responsible as the Chief of Police for what happened, for establishing a culture, as Chief McNamara described it?
Well, Shannon, I certainly think that any chief of police is the #1 law enforcement officer in his or her community, and you have to be held accountable for the actions of your officers. I believe that very strongly.
So you think that the police commission was right in asking him to step down?
No, I don't profess to have enough knowledge about the Los Angeles Police Department or the political or cultural environment in Los Angeles to make that kind of decision, Shannon. I really don't.
But still, you're saying that under the circumstances...
Well, I think any chief is to be held accountable to the public, as are the men and women in each police agency.
All right. Chief Greenberg, do you feel the same way?
No, I think that situation, at least I look at it a little bit differently. I was very, very much distressed, as I'm sure Chief Gates was, to see what has to be one of the worst beatings that anyone has ever witnessed by video camera, in person, or anywhere else. It was a terrible incident. Nonetheless, I would be very surprised if Chief Gates was even more horrified himself to be shown this particular video. I don't believe, for example, that if he had been there that he would have participated. I don't believe, for example, that if he had been there he would have stood by and done nothing. And just certainly, I'm sure, was much distressed with him. he has some 8,300 sworn officers and almost 2,000 civilians, and if one of them goes out, or 2 or 3 or 10 of them go out, and if they are able to do something that's strange, weird, or some sort of wacko situation, he is not necessarily responsible for it.
Well,
I was very much, if I can continue, I was very much disappointed in the way that Chief Gates approached this matter. It did not appear to me that some of the statements that he made subsequent to this particular incident were those that would have led to a healing situation.
You're saying you don't think he's been vigorous enough, or in pursuing it, or no?
Well, some of the statements he made about Mr. Rodney King, that maybe this would serve as the vehicle to get him his life together and all of that sort of thing, I don't think that that was constructive. And it certainly did not give the message that I think should have been given, and that is that this is something that would not be tolerated in Los Angeles and shouldn't be tolerated any place, and that no one, no matter what their crime or alleged crime, should be treated in this fashion.
What about that, Chief Binkley?
You know, my concern is some people are making an assumption that there's a negative culture in the Los Angeles Police Department, and I really disagree with that. And I think you'll find, if you deal with some Los Angeles police officers, that conduct was far from what's accepted conduct in the Los Angeles Police Department. I think the best example of that is if you look throughout the nation, there are about 36 police chiefs that were selected out of the management ranks of the Los Angeles Police Department to go to other cities throughout the nation to solve problems very similar to this. And I think they're fine representatives of the culture.
So, but what about the other point that that Chief McNamara made, and I'll come back to him in a moment, to make that all police in the country are hurt when a situation like this is allowed to fester, as it has?
Well, there's two parts to your question. One, allowed a situation to fester. I don't think there's a festering there, but I think blatant misconduct, and it's hurt us all. Nobody in law enforcement that I've talked to accepts that conduct, and they think the most vigorous prosecution should be engendered immediately. But I don't think there's a problem festering there that the chief of police could have handled. And I think after all is said and done and the review of the administration in Los Angeles is conducted, you'll find that that's true.
Let me ask you to respond to that, Chief McNamara, and let's try to get at this question. How much responsibility does a police chief bear for what goes on his force, for what his officers, men and women, do when they're out on the streets?
The chief bears total responsibility, and denying that is simply a cop-out. I think the chief can't prevent every instance of improper conduct. No one expects the chief to do that, but they expect the chief to set up a training program and to take prompt action after misconduct. In the Rodney King incident, we saw that there must have been a code of silence, all of those officers standing around as witnesses, and the 3 officers or 4 engaged in the beating had total confidence that they wouldn't be reported, and indeed they were not until the videotape came out. Chief Gates made statements both before and after the incident that are very insulting to minorities. He has, through the years, come out with very belligerent statements, a kind of militaristic philosophy of police that is at odds with what we're doing in the rest of the country, where we're talking about community policing. So I think overall we have to look at the whole picture. It was not an aberration. To ask us to believe that insults our intelligence. The communications system was used by those officers to make racist jokes, to blatantly joke about the beating. That system is monitored routinely by supervisors. Again, that's evidence that there must be something wrong in that department. Now, I'm not condemning all of the officers in the department, but I do think for their sake they need to re-examine themselves. It's sort of like being an alcoholic. You can't recover unless you admit you have a problem. I think Chief Gates and his defenders are denying that there's a problem. The community certainly doesn't agree, and I think the chief will have to eventually step down before the recovery can take place and before the department can regain the credibility that it needs to give effective police service.
Well, Chief Greenberg, just to try to broaden this again, on this question of how much responsibility a police chief bears, let's go back again to that original point that Chief McNamara made, that there's a culture, there's a tone, an ethical set of standards that's established, he says, by a police chief. Do you accept that? I mean,
yeah, I accept that. Basically, it takes a while to get that tone within the department. I think that probably Chief Gates has been in the department for 42 years and has been a high-ranking member of that particular agency for a long time, and he certainly can contribute to that. But simply to say that one of the officers decides to go out and rob a bank tonight or to beat somebody up, that somehow the mayor ought to resign, or that the chief of police or the police commission ought to resign, then that's, I don't think that's an appropriate fashion. What disturbs me again about that whole incident was how it was handled, and of course, what Chief McNamara pointed out, that's the communication system. When you have that kind of verbiage and that type of thing going on in the communication system, that has to be larger than just those 20 or 22 people that observed that particular incident. There's got to be more to it simply than that.
Chief Bishop, how much of an aberration is it that what happened in Los Angeles?
I don't know, Judy, but I think when you examine those tapes and the communications tapes that were released, it's very clear that there is a deep problem there, and it appears to be much more than just an aberration. But again, you know, I am not very knowledgeable.
No, I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't make myself clear. An aberration from around what's going on in police departments around the country was what I was getting at.
Well, I think it's causing all of us to examine our training, our communication skills with the public, and it's something all chiefs of police all over this nation are very, very concerned about because of the kind of environment that our men and women have to work in. It's very dangerous out there. It's a very difficult job, and that is something all of us are concerned about. None of us want an LA incident to happen in our communities.
And yet you've all, I assume, and I know in some circumstances this is true, you've all had allegations of police brutality in your departments. All police chiefs, most police chiefs have. How do you, is there a method of dealing with them that is more effective than what you see being done in many cases around the country right now?
Well, Judy, I think the chief is in a leadership position. And as part of his leadership role, he must influence thinking and behavior and attitudes of his people, and that's very important that he does that. He must set the tone for the whole organization and how we treat people that we serve.
And is that being done? Let me turn back to you, Chief Binkley. Is that being done right now in most police departments around the country that you're aware of?
You know, I think it is. I think you'll find those elements that I talked about, whether they're training or discipline or community relations, controls, management accountability, affirmative action, really are being done throughout the majority of the nation. And that's why I'm a little concerned about the prejudging of the Los Angeles Police Department. I think what you'll find is all of those things that contribute to a very positive culture have been done in the Los Angeles Police Department, and I really do have to say for not only Los Angeles, but Los Angeles County and all of the law enforcement officers here, those things are being done, and it is a very positive culture. And I think for somebody at different jurisdictions throughout the nation to prejudge without really much facts is inappropriate.
There was an opinion piece written in the New York Times today by former New York Police Commissioner Patrick Murphy, who suggested that there's just not enough of a support structure at the local level and the state level to back up the police chiefs who are trying to deal with these incidents of excessive force. Would you agree with that?
You know, Judy, one of the things that I think that's really cute in the, if there is a cute part of this incident in Los Angeles is there's a lot of complaints about the police chief having civil service protection. Now, all that simply means is there must be a reason to fire the chief. We fire people in civil service every day throughout the nation. The problem perceived by some people is there is no justifiable cause to fire Darrell Gates. It's very simple. If there's a case, if there's a reason to fire Darrell Gates, it has to go before the Civil Service Commission like all other civil service cases. Now that seems fair to me, and I know that causes some people concern because they'd much rather it be a political appointment that can be a pretty political whim and fire him.
Well, you want to address that particular point, Chief McNamara, about whether there should be civilian oversight?
The civil service system is geared to handle charges that you're late for work, that you may not have filled out the right reports, that you didn't handle your communications properly and so on. It doesn't adequately deal with leadership and with instilling confidence in the public about your police force. And I've been in this business a long time, and I know that in other cities, the chief who doesn't instill confidence is quite properly removed by the elected officials. Now, that's a democracy, and we can call people politicians when we don't like what they're doing and so on, but the fact is that some police cultures can be very closed in and very insensitive to community needs, especially when you have lots of different cultures and different groups in a city. And I think it's quite proper for the elected officials, whether it be the mayor or someone else, to exert influence and to choose a good police chief. Now, Daryl Gates, under his system, has a right to due process, and I don't argue that he shouldn't have that. My suggestion is that if he really took the noble view of this, he'd recognize that his own presence as chief is tearing that city apart now. He'd do himself a favor, the department a favor, and the city. If he did retire, he's polarizing his police force against the rest of the city, against the public, against the different groups in the city. And a police department's job is to reduce conflict, not be the source of conflict.
Chief Greenberg, let me come back to you just quickly here at the end. Is there a lesson to be learned for the rest of the country, for police chiefs, by this whole experience in Los Angeles?
Certainly there's a lesson to be learned, and I think that lesson has been learned even by the most recalcitrant police chiefs and officers, and that is people are going to have to be held accountable for what they do. And chiefs are going to have to be held accountable, at least indirectly, along with mayors and city councils and police commissions and other groups that have some authority over the police department. That's just the bottom line.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you all. Chief McNamara, Chief Binkley, Chief Bishop, and Chief Greenberg. We thank you all for being with us.
Thanks, Jude.
First tonight, we look at changes in the Los Angeles Police Department in the wake of the videotape beating of Rodney King last year. Today, Philadelphia Police Chief Willie Williams was picked to replace Chief Daryl Gates, whose resignation was one result of the King incident. The trial of 4 police officers involved will go to the jury within days. Correspondent Jeffrey Kay examines what's happened in the Los Angeles Police Department over the past year.
The videotape beating of Rodney King in March 1991 was a turning point for the Los Angeles Police Department. In the resulting criminal case, department practices and policy were as much on trial as the defendants. The defense presented witnesses in an attempt to show the officers' conduct was standard police procedure.
Did you believe, based upon your training and experience, that that blow was within the training that you had received from the Los Angeles Police Department? Yes, sir.
This is, once again, an aberration that is being rejected, and by this department, by all the members.
From the beginning, Police Chief Daryl Gates contended the beating of Rodney King was uncharacteristic. But the case served as a lightning rod for long-held grievances, particularly in the black community.
We need good police officers, but we need to say to them, we will not allow them to do anything less than to protect and to serve us, because we are citizens and taxpayers like everybody else.
Pressure on the chief to step down mounted. Civil rights groups also demanded police reform, such as greater civilian oversight and tougher discipline. But the writing was on the wall for Gates and for the LA Police Department when an independent commission began hearings and a thorough investigation of the police department. The commission was headed by former State Department official Warren Christopher. Last July, the commission offered a blueprint for reform. It called for a major overhaul of the disciplinary process, improved training, better community relations, and a new chief of police more accountable to City Hall. While a new police commission searched for a replacement for Daryl Gates, the chief promised he was serious about reform.
In spite of the fact that we've been defensive, we've gone forward, and we have implemented or are in the process of implementing all of those that we have the power to implement. And so I think there have been significant changes. Along with that, we have done a total evaluation, reevaluation of our training.
New police recruits get an extra 6 weeks of instruction in cultural awareness.
I told you, you cannot ride my streets looking like a gangster.
There is also more community-based policing.
This is the way police work should be done. Talk to people, stop, be out here, you can smell, hear, touch, you know, everything is just so much more what it should be.
The LA Police Department says it would like to see more foot and bike patrols, but is limited by budget cuts. The department is losing about 35 officers a month due to attrition. Still, Captain Paul Jefferson says it's essential for police to pay closer attention to community needs.
After the scrutiny we were under the Christopher Commission, one of the things that became abundantly clear is that we as a police department were doing really a terrible job of listening to the community.
Jefferson is participating in another aspect of community-based policing.
Thank you, Captain Jefferson. Give Captain Jefferson another round of applause, why don't you?
This was a recent meeting to elect members of a community council.
I want to help to improve our community. I want to work with the police department as well as the police department help them to work with us.
The council will meet regularly with representatives of the local police precinct.
We feel that our officers put their lives at great risk for our sakes, but we also think that there should be some in-service on human relations, that people will not be judged by the color of their skin or by the way they dress before learning about the content of their character.
If you would be kind enough now to complete your balloting, we will be glad to collect them. It is
LA Councilman Mark Ridley Thomas, a longtime police critic, is one of the organizers of the Community Council.
The notion of community-based policing, as we have tried to define it, is to have substantial community involvement.
And how will this prevent future Rodney Kings?
Well, the assumption is that with a higher level of police accountability that's informed by better police-community relations, these kind of problems are prevented and at minimum assuaged. These are the first wave of representatives for the Community-Based Policing Council for Basic Car Area 12A53. Now give them a big round of applause.
But some police critics find little reason for applause. They say not enough has been done to discipline the bad apples, those who have repeated instances of excessive force.
If Darrell Gates had focused more attention on accountability within his own department over the last several years, we wouldn't have been bleeding the taxpayers of Los Angeles dry.
LA City Councilman Zev Yaroslavsky points to the millions of dollars paid out annually by the city in lawsuits brought by people claiming to be victims of police abuse.
Last Tuesday, in the Budget and Finance Committee, which I chair, we recommended the settlement, at the suggestion of our own city attorney, of $1.7 million worth of cases, judgments and settlements. $1.75 million worth of cases, all of them excessive use of force cases, involving our police officers. In not one of those cases, and there were 9 of them, in not one of those cases was any of the police officers who was involved in those incidents that cost us $1.75 million disciplined in any way. In fact, not even a reprimand was put in their file, in their personnel file. It's as though they did nothing wrong.
Gates' explanation is that all too often juries are predisposed against police officers.
I think the peril today to police officers is civil suits. I think that's the real peril. It's not the guns out there, it's not any of that, it's civil suits. And people who sit on juries today are killing effective policing in this city and I think perhaps elsewhere.
In the months following the Rodney King beating, complaints lodged against LA police rose steadily.
And I think one of the factors was that a lot of publicity came about after the Rodney King incident that made a lot of people aware of the system. And a lot of complaints came in that were for periods even before the incident actually occurred.
But critics such as the American Civil Liberties Union fault the police department's complaint system.
We are here this morning to give you vivid examples of how 1 year later, a reform that could have been done by the police department itself, by Police Chief Darrell Gates, has not happened.
Recently, the ACLU released a study echoing a finding of the Christopher Commission, saying the police department is still unresponsive to citizen complaints.
More than a year after the Rodney King beating, the LAPD is still treating allegations of police misconduct as if the officers couldn't possibly have done something wrong, and even if they did, the department doesn't want to hear about it. And if that isn't cause enough for alarm, our study finds that the department has installed a supposedly easily accessible citizen complaint toll-free hotline. The problem is, for all intents and purposes, this number is unlisted.
In spite of what the ACLU says, an awful lot of people found their way into our complaint process. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this increase in complaints. That's pure bunk that the ACLU puts out, in my judgment. They said we didn't know where the 800 number was. That may be true. We had no money to fund a public relations campaign to tell everybody, here's the 800 number. We provided that to the various desks. They should have had it. If they didn't have it, that's our fault. We did an audit just before that. Our audit came out beautifully. ACLU's, as I would have expected, came out very poorly. I won't say what I think about the ACLU.
It is rare for Chief Gates not to say just what's on his mind. But even as he prepares to step down, some community leaders are pushing a police reform ballot measure, using Gates as ammunition.
There's no change in the attitude of arrogance and the attitude of disrespect for the quality of life of those perpetrated by our own police chief, Darrell Gates.
The campaign is on in Los Angeles for passage of a June ballot measure that would incorporate changes recommended by the Christopher Commission. It would put a civilian on the police disciplinary panel called the Board of Rights. The proposition would also set term limits for the police chief and make that position accountable to City Hall.
We are not anti-police. Let that be made clear, because I am supporting, and I do support law enforcement, but I do not support the brutality that's being issued out against our community. It is time for reform, reform, and reform.
Police Commission President Stanley Scheinbaum, a former chair of the ACLU, agrees. He supports passage of the proposed charter amendment.
What would be the main change? I think the main change is that the chief himself be taken off the civil service protection, exempt, as we say.
That's also one of the more contentious aspects.
Absolutely.
Darrell Gates feels the measure will politicize the office of the chief of police and reduce the chief's independence, something he has enjoyed, so he's campaigning against it.
And what they want to do is really silence the chief of police. They don't like the fact that I speak out the way I do. It's politically incorrect to speak out the way I speak out.
Gates finds support among those more concerned with crime than reform of the police department. He raises the specter of corruption if the ballot measure passes.
The chief of police will be right under the control of the mayor. And if you speak out against the mayor, against the city council, and the mayor wants to fire you, just like that, and that's all there is to it, folks. That's all there is to it. The chief is done, and that's the system they have in the East.
The chief of Los Angeles is the only public service in government in the United States who has lifetime tenure aside from the federal judiciary. Now, this enables the commission to make decisions about him if he's totally incompetent or if there's something wrong about the way he's running the department. But there's a check on the commission. The mayor can change the commission's decision on that. The city council can change it. It's not unilateral, arbitrary decision-making.
As he comes to the end of a 14-year tenure as police chief, Darrell Gates has been placed in the peculiar position of implementing reforms that have been forced upon him. And although he has complained about the Christopher Commission's recommendations, he is now adopting many of the changes as his own.
We would have made all of these changes, or most of them, whether we'd had a Christopher Commission or not. We are making, I think, major changes, major strides. This has given us incentive to do that. I will be the first to admit it.
But for some, the changes are not major enough.
And the brutality is still going on. Complaints are being made and not addressed.
Some police critics would like to see more resources devoted to investigating police uses of force, but that will likely cost money. So one of the next political questions looming for police reform advocates is, how much can a financially strapped city afford to spend to police its own police force?